politics, and that's surprising to me. We gave it everything we got. That's all you can do in these things, and it's nothing that I wish I would have done or anything like that. And you just come up short.
We are thrilled to have a panel of analysts here with us this evening. Republican, former Secretary of State Bob Brown, former chair of the State Republican Party and County Commissioner Susan Good-Giese, and Democrat and former legislative candidate Gary Stein. All right, let's jump right into the analysis on the U.S. House race. We talked about key counties. Bob, start with you because Yellowstone County, we're looking at the results right there, and these were the early numbers as they were coming in, and of course Ryan Zinke, a convincing win in Yellowstone County, and that always seems to be the bellwether.
Yeah, it's the Ohio of Montana politics. It's really the bellwether county. And Zinke did real well. You can't always tell by the early returns, but Zinke did so well by the early returns in Yellowstone County that it was pretty clear that he was going to win. And I think we saw from the interviews that they're two real quality gentlemen. And I'm encouraged by the fact that Ryan Zinke intends to reach out to all people in Montana, regardless of whether they may have voted for him or not. And hopefully he'll be an excellent congressman.
Susan, were there other counties you were looking at as well?
Well, of course, I am a commissioner in Lewis and Clark counties, so I was very much interested in what was happening there, particularly because Mr. Lewis lives in Helena. And so, of course, that was particularly interesting. But always there is a huge emphasis that's put on Yellowstone County because it is where 15% of the votes live, and it's very indicative. When you get votes from Yellowstone County early in the evening, you've got a pretty good idea about how things are going to go.
And that's got to sting a little bit for John Lewis, being a native son, identifying himself with Billings and Missoula and living in Helena. And a couple of Democrats did very well in state legislative races, and he wasn't able to sort of generate either the name recognition or maybe his association with Max Baucus didn't work to his advantage in the way that it might have.
Well, let's take a look at the other federal race that we had that was going on, and that, of course, was the race for the U.S. Senate. Congressman Steve Daines trying to move over from the House to the Senate, and a convincing win over Amanda Curtis in that race. Now, their county map, no, this isn't. Well, it is identical, as a matter of fact. If you're having deja vu there, it's the exact same county map as the U.S. House race, as Amanda Curtis carrying those same 6 counties, but Steve Daines rolling with 50 of 56 counties. And for him in Bozeman last night, that was another chance to reflect on the past and look ahead to the future.
Well, tonight you made history. You made history. It has been 101 years since Montana Republicans have held this Senate seat. Congratulations. Montanans are very independent-oriented voters. They tend not to vote necessarily Republican or Democratic. They tend to vote for whoever's going to best represent the state of Montana. And that's what I intend to do going back to Washington. And I'm just grateful and humbled by the tremendous support we've seen tonight, that Montanans would put their trust in me to represent them back in Washington.
What changes can Montanans expect to see with the Republicans in the majority?
First is to stop this gridlock between the House and the Senate and to start moving legislation forward. I hope we can see the Keystone Pipeline get passed. The House had 380 bills that they have passed. So I think we can find several bills that we can move from the House to the Senate and then give those to President Obama, and hopefully he'll get them signed to start moving legislation forward and stopping the gridlock back in Washington.
And ambitious agenda there for U.S. Senator-elect Steve Daines. As for Amanda Curtis, she was in Butte last night, and she got a chance to talk a bit about the short 80-day campaign that she got to run.
Now that this is all over, no one can say that I'm not a hard worker or that I don't do exactly what I said I was going to do, and I'm proud of that.
Anything you would like to say to Steve Daines?
I would like to wish him well and best of luck. He has said that he will reach across the aisle and work on these issues, women's issues, veterans issues, seniors issues, our public lands, jobs and union issues and middle class issues. And I just hope that he will put his money where his mouth is and we'll be watching.
This one, again, went according to form. It was probably about a 17, 18-point gap in the polls going into it, and that's what it ended up as. And a lot of similar counties, I think, as well, that we talked about to look at there. Yellowstone County, certainly one of them. Cascade County was another county that we were looking at. And as you see the numbers there, Gary, it was Steve Daines carrying that by not quite 4,000 votes.
Yeah, and not a lot of surprises. This was a train wreck for the Democrats right from the get-go. Amanda Curtis did it as well as anybody could have possibly expected her to do, getting the train back on track and getting getting some momentum going, but it was too little too late. And then you look at counties like Missoula, where she did well and won, but the voter turnout was even lower than she was going to need to win.
And of course, I always pay special interest to Cascade County. I used to be a legislator from Great Falls. And so I was very interested to see what happened with the U.S. Senate race, but also the more Montana-based Senate race. And, you know, there were some pickups for Republicans, perhaps some benefit of coattails from Senator-elect Daines. But Cascade County has always skewed a little bit to the left, but they seem to be shifting ever so slightly to the right.
Trends you saw, Bob?
Yeah, I think that the big wins that both Daines and Zinke had in Cascade County is indicative of a real Republican sweep of Montana this year. But I was encouraged greatly by their comments. I thought that Amanda Curtis's comments toward Steve Daines, the victor, were very conciliatory. And Daines's comments about how Congress needs to work together and break the gridlock to put some legislation on the president's desk. And that's a real good thing. The president doesn't have to sign it, but there can be negotiations and give and take, and that's what our political system's all about. And he's obviously going to be part of the solution, if he can be, rather than to continue the gridlock that's been going on back in Washington. So that's a positive thing too.
Yeah, it's a different feel, I think, in the midterms, especially in Montana as compared to the national scene. But we're going to continue on down the ballot now and look at a couple of the state Supreme Court races that were in play. The incumbents headed back to the state's highest court for another 8-year term. Jim Rice with an overwhelming victory there as he moves forward. But it was the other race that I think caught everybody's attention. Unusually partisan, and a lot of money poured into this one as Mike Wheat and Lawrence Van Dyke were trading blows throughout the fall, and unfortunately we were all subjected to some of these commercials that we saw running ad nauseum. It almost felt like we saw more Supreme Court ads than we did some of the candidate ads. So I'm going to let one of you have a stab at this. Who wants to talk about it? All right, Susan.
And some of these ads, of course, you know, were a little bit difficult, but I think that we should thank God that we didn't live in North Carolina, where $111 million were spent. I don't think the poor folks who lived there were able even to take a breath since, you know, probably the middle of August. So I know that this looks extreme to us. And frankly, I thought it was over the top. But boy, when you compare it to other parts of the country, we got off relatively easy.
All right. Well, we've got Susan here to keep it in perspective. You're not agreeing with that?
Well, no, I just thought it was detestable how we always talk about outside interest coming into the state, and in this case, the Stanford University and Dartmouth College mailer was really over the top in terms of people using our electoral process as a plaything, and that was truly detestable. And something should be done still about that. You know, you don't want to forget that particular behavior, but I guess we should be thankful for the fact that we're on a much smaller scale in that respect. But I really admire Mike Wheat for coming out and fighting when he was attacked, and he came out, you know, pretty verbally and very strongly to defend his own record, and the voters responded to that, I think.
All right. Well, it is all relative. So now let's go down to what really impacts us on the day-to-day level, and that, of course, is the legislative races, the state legislative races. And we talked about getting a couple of bellwether races to take a look at, and I know you were tracking some other ones. So we focused on the state Senate. That was the one that seemed to be in play, potentially, as the Republicans with a solid majority in the House. And this is Senate District 24. This is over in Billings. Mary McNally holding on to that one for the Democrats, winning it by about 500 votes over Tanya Shelnut. And we were also tracking Senate District 11. That's over in Great Falls. Ed Buttrey was the Republican incumbent in this race, and he hangs on to that seat with a strong challenge from Vonnie Brown. All right, so I know there are other races that you were paying attention to across the state that kind of gave a feel for the upcoming legislature. What were some of the other ones you were looking at?
Of those races, a lot of money was spent in both of those races, but Frankie Wilmer in Senate District 32 out of Bozeman, I think mostly the west side of Bozeman, spent the most of any candidate, and she lost to Jedediah Hinkle, and that's a very stark contrast between two candidates. And there was a fair difference in the amount of money spent, so that's a real, you know, negative for the Democrats there, and a real a surprising shock, I think, for the Republicans.
Well, the race that I was close to living in Lewis and Clark County was a race between former legislator Jill Konauer and Joe Dooling, and that was a hotly contested race. Turned out to be not quite so close as people had anticipated. But was very rancorous. Lots of complaints with the Political Practices Commissioner, which I always think reflects desperation on the part of a candidate. And one of those has been resolved, the other one not yet, and of course it'll be after the fact. But that was a very contentious race as well.
Bob?
John, I think the race in Senate District 24 is a good example of how all politics is local, because Daines and Zinke carry Yellowstone County overwhelmingly. And that Senate District 24, had been carried by the Democratic candidate 4 years ago by, after the recount, I believe just 4 votes. And more money was spent in that race than in any other race in Montana State Senate election history. $125,000 was spent by the Democrat and $115,000 by the Republican. And the Democrat prevailed by 4 votes. This time, although the district was changed a little bit by reapportionment, the Democrat carried the district pretty handily. Mary McNally carried it pretty handily. And in addition, the Democrats picked up a House seat in that same Senate district. So I think they were extremely well organized. I think they had their ground game together real well, and they were able to survive the tide in Yellowstone County in that particular Senate district.
Right. All right. I know this is a loaded question with a limited amount of time, but and it might be too early to tell, but do you think redistricting played any role in anything this time around? Because this is our first chance to kind of take a look at that.
Well, it had to play some because there were open districts. I mean, it just the math adds up that way. But in terms of total numbers, it doesn't appear to, because Democrats gained 2 in the House and were dead even in the Senate. I just wonder if the personalities of those numbers are what's going to change the legislature. I know we'll hear from some legislators later, and so maybe they'll have a better sense of how the personalities will work together or conflict.
All right.
And you know, to me, I think that this is much larger than a partisan issue. I don't think this is Republican versus Democrat. I think that this is urban versus rural. And you really see that with redistricting. When you see people, if you'll see a senator having many counties that they represent, you know, and you might have 4 or 5 or half a dozen senators, you know, from one municipality. That makes it very, very difficult. So and that will always come about as a result of redistricting, because you have to apportion the state correctly. And so those rural legislators are having to go further and further out, losing their community of interest, and also just their ability to get around within their district.
All right.
It's a big, big challenge.
Yeah, Bob, you're getting cheated on this one. So we're still talking about the balance of power, and you alluded to it earlier. But let's take a look at how things are now going to shape up as we go towards the 2015 session. First of all, in the Senate, as Gary mentioned, it was basically a wash. The Democrats thought they might pick up a seat or 2, but the Republicans holding that majority at 29-21 in the Senate. Over in the House, the Dems did pick up a couple of seats there, but again, solid majority for the Republicans, as they now have a 59-41 advantage in the House. Now, what will the 2015 session be like? Last session, we thought we really thought there might be less acrimony, a new governor, a different cast of characters, but disagreements were there, like this protest that took place in the Senate by the Democrats, as there was some procedural arguing going on there. Both sides ended up pointing fingers in terms of that one, but they did eventually resolve it and finish the people's business in the 90 days. Well, we're very pleased to have 2 legislators who will be going back to work in Helena coming up in the next session, as we've got State Senator Sue Malik and State Representative Ron Eli. So thank you both for coming in. So let's start with the idea of the tone and tenor of an upcoming session. What do you think are some of the keys in order to, I guess, set that going forward?
Okay, well, it's interesting that you picked that particular incident in the Senate. I was in the House for 2 sessions and in the Senate for 1 session. The Senate is only 50 people, and you really do get to know people. We were able to develop a coalition and get things done in conjunction or cooperation with Republicans in the Senate. The camaraderie was good. That was one incident on one day that we were adamant about protecting voter rights, because we believe as Democrats that everyone in our democracy should vote, and we want to keep our voting rights broad. So that was a splash in the pan, and usually we were sizzling along quite nicely.
And in the House?
And I think that we always go in, John, with the idea that we're going to get along, if you will. And I think that's basic Montana tenor, that we always want to do that. There are always issues, like Senator Malik says, that are going to come up that are going to take us off base. But generally the tenor always is let's get along, let's shake hands, let's get something done for the people of Montana.
So I don't have to stand in between the two of you then during the discussion. You're both fine.
We're okay.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So with all these good feelings, let's talk about going forward. 2015. Again, lots of work to be done. So Ron, I'll start with you with the Republicans, the solid majority in the House. What's the agenda look like as we go into 2015?
Well, we talk about what we've done in the past in the tenor. Now, we always go in, shake hands, and we want to get along. In the last session, I believe that the Republicans have a sense that we came in with the new governor. We wanted to get along. We did shake hands, and we wanted to set the precedent that we want to get a lot of business done for Montana. But I will tell you that the Republicans walked away feeling like we left a lot of things on the table. So even though we are going to come back and we're going to shake hands with the governors and reach across the aisle, we're going to be doing it with a little stiffer hand grip and a little harder handshake. So we're going to make sure that we can drive some Montana agenda that fits what the Republicans want to do also.
Well, you're in a different situation, obviously, over in the Senate and the minority party. So how are you looking at it in terms of an agenda and what can be accomplished?
Okay. Well, we have already been talking to the governor, and we've been talking to some Republicans around the state who are very successful business people and call themselves responsible Republicans. They want to make a difference for Montana. And so we're talking Medicaid expansion, and I think something will happen on Medicaid expansion this session. We're talking about infrastructure. Both sides want to do something about infrastructure. We want to do something in terms of bonding, because we talked about this last session, because Montana is ranked the most fiscally prudent state in the nation. Our bonding is at a very nice level, so we'd like to do that. Grants to Montana communities for early childhood education. We have a tremendous number of low-income students in our state, and we need to make sure they get early childhood education so they don't end up in prison or on welfare. Mental health services are at a crisis point in our state, so we hope to increase mental health services in our communities and also at the state level. And finally, tuition freezes and expanding research at our universities. Montana also is ranked #1 in the nation for entrepreneurship, and the more research we can do at our universities, the more entrepreneurship can develop from those efforts. So I think there's a lot of things we can work together on.
So that's a lengthy list you've got
Yes.
there. Did you want to add anything in there? We're just about running out of time.
Well, no, I won't add anything, but there's certainly going to be a lot of discussion with all the points that she brought up, and we're not going to always be on the same page, and we're talking to the governor too. And one thing to keep in mind, that we do hold majorities in the House, and we do hold majorities in the Senate, and that leadership is going to get together and set a lot of how we're going to move forward with the discussion with the governor also. And so a lot of those issues that were brought up may be issues on the table, but we're going to look at them a little differently than Senator Malik just described.
Right, there'll be some respectful disagreement going on there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you both. It was great
Thank
to
you,
hear
John.
from you, and we look forward to watching what happens in that 2015 session. Now, the last session, one of the key things, and State Senator Malik just mentioned that, was, of course, the voter registration, same-day voter registration, and the fact that it was a topic that was addressed on several bills during that session. Of course, eventually they sent that issue to Montana voters, and it ended up as Legislative Referendum 126. And that was another thing on the ballot that we wanted to take a look at there, as Montanans rejected that idea of changing the voting registration deadline. They actually vote to keep it as same-day registration for the time being. And the other ballot measure that we had to weigh in on this election cycle, changing the state auditor's name, Constitutional Amendment 45. It was on the ballot 10 years ago. Montanans didn't want to do it then. They do not want to do it now. All right, we've got opinions abound here on these two ballot measures, so have at it. Who wants to start?
Why don't you go ahead, Bob?
Yes, Bob, we cut you off last time. Go ahead.
Well, I was Secretary of State at one time, so
That's what
I
I've
have
heard.
some knowledge and background in elections, and I think they're extremely well run in Montana. The county clerks and recorders do an excellent job, and I think the Secretary of State's office does an excellent job. So we haven't any problems along those lines. But I've also thought that it seems to me that it isn't asking anything very much for a voter who wants to register to do so the Friday before the election rather than waiting until Election Day. It doesn't seem to me that that's an unreasonable requirement. And I can remember years ago when I was a legislator, that the requirement was that people had to register 30 days before the election. And I was a believer in the idea of moving it up to Friday before the election. Well, that idea's time, I guess, has come and gone because the legislature changed it from 30 days before to the same day. And It's the way it is in Montana. The people have spoken, so I guess that's the way it will remain. But it seems to me that the side that had the big brouhaha that you just saw in the state Senate, over this issue, the side that favored moving the registration from election day back to Friday would have put up some kind of a battle for their idea. And what we saw on television and in terms of advertising and that sort of thing was totally one-sided. It was totally on the side of the people who opposed it.
Yeah. All right. So,
well, there's a long history of parties and individuals in those parties trying to restrict voting rights. So you could blame Democrats and Republicans across the board historically. But since 1973, 10 states have enacted same-day voter registration, and the trend has actually been towards that. And it's only been a recent trend that, generally speaking, members of the Republican Party in these various states have been looking to restrict voter rights. It's usually around redistricting. So it also goes back to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which the Supreme Court has done some damage to in the last couple of years. And as a result, I think some legislators feel empowered to go a little bit further to, sort of put the clamps on this fraud that doesn't actually exist across various states in terms of voting rights.
All right, Susan.
Well, of course, I just have to weigh in on that because I think it's interesting that with all the emphasis that we put on people's ability to vote easily, more conveniently, from home, someday perhaps, electronically, what I find ironic is that we go to these great lengths and yet voter participation continues to wane. And so I think that would go back to the previous initiative that was also on about changing the Secretary of State, or the Commission of Political Practices. I'm sorry, I'm confused. the Office of the State Auditor.
Yeah.
And
Gary's not helping you over there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And I haven't any sleep in 3 nights. Election night for me last night. But I guess that my point would be that this was a very simple change, and once again it was rejected by the voters. And I think that it just shows how serious people are about their mistrust from government, even on such a simple initiative.
All right, so I think that's part of Susan's final word on this. As we're wrapping up the 2014 midterm election.
I had a jillion other things to say. Go ahead.
No, well, we'll see how long these two chatty Cathys go here.
I'm always appreciative that the winning members or the members of the winning party don't gloat and have always been very respectful. And I really appreciate the comments from the legislators that we are going to work together on these sorts of things. That not just the politicians in the state house and at the national level, but citizens, and that they do take a little bit more active participation, and so maybe those voting numbers will come up and we won't need to look at either restrictions or at making things more convenient for people. So that's the bright spot, I think.
All right, Susan, you still get to try a little bit if you want. Any other thoughts you had on wrapping up this, other than having to stand between these two guys?
I know. Well, I'm a lucky girl.
I wouldn't go that far, Susan, but you're so diplomatic.
Well, I know, because actually in my county, I'm working very hard to make all county races be nonpartisan.
All right, Bob, final word.
Well, that's not a bad idea, actually, I think. I don't see what needs to be very partisan about city council races or certainly county administrative offices, auditor and clerk and recorder and that sort of thing. I think that would probably be a pretty good idea. I'm not sure that political parties have been that beneficial in our history, but they're a fundamental part of our history. They go clear back actually to the administration of George Washington. We just need to have them cooperate with each other when it's in the public interest to do so, and we've had a lot of partisanship in American history. What's going on now isn't unique in American history, but there is a way for well-intentioned people to work together to work out their problems, and the general public is so tired of this gridlock that I'm hopeful that in the legislature, even though we have a Republican legislature and a Democrat governor, and on the national level where we have a Republican Congress and a Democratic president, that they'll get the message and they'll start to work together on things.
Well, we can only hope. It's great to hear from the three of you. I want to thank you for coming in and providing some insight and analysis on this 2014 midterm election. And also want to thank Ron Eli and Sue Malik also coming in. We look forward to watching their work in the legislature coming up in 2015. Of course, most of all, we want to thank you for watching tonight the How Montanans Voted, analyzing the 2014 election. From all of us here at Montana PBS, thanks again for watching and good night.
This Montana PBS special, How Montanans Voted, analyzing the 2014 election, was brought to you in part by the Greater Montana Foundation, encouraging communications on issues trends, and values of importance to Montanans.
Coming up on Austin City Limits.
Rain, 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 a wicked rain falling from the sky. Down, 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 pouring down upon the night.
Where can you watch great movies like An American in Paris or The Music Man? On Montana PBS Film Classics. Saturday evenings at 8, you can watch everything from old-time favorites to recent blockbusters.